Roosevelt, Astor, Forbes, Yale, Harvard. You know these names, but you don't know they all got rich the same way. Dumping opium into China, thousands of tons, millions addicted, for 100% profit. Then they spent 200 years making sure you'd never find out. Until now. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president on Mount Rushmore, the man who saved America from the Great Depression. His family fortune came from drug trafficking, hard drugs, opium, millions of addicts, millions dead. The Roosevelt family got obscenely rich from it. They weren't alone. The Astor family, America's wealthiest family, drug money. Forbes magazine was built on opium profits. Yale's Skull and Bones was funded by drug smugglers. Harvard buildings were paid for with Chinese opium silver. The most powerful families in American history, the institutions that shaped the nation's leaders, the dynasties that still run the country today, all built by dumping drugs into China. Industrial scale, thousands of tons, for 100% profit margins. Then they buried the evidence, rewrote the history books, built libraries and museums with blood money, and made sure you'd never find out. But the shipping records exist, the letters survived, the account books are in the archives. They reveal that America's aristocracy got rich doing what would put people in prison today, except they did it to an entire country, poisoning millions, destroying China's economy, getting so rich they could erase themselves from history. The truth about the opium trade. In the early 1800s, Britain had a problem. They were buying massive amounts of tea, silk, and porcelain from China, but China didn't want British products, so Britain paid in silver, draining their reserves. They needed something to sell to China. They found it, opium. Grow opium in British India, refine it into smokable form, smuggle it into China where opium was illegal. The Chinese government knew it was poison, but British and American merchants didn't care. The profit margin was 400 to 500%. You buy opium in India for $100, smuggle it to China, sell it for $500 to $600. The risk was high. Chinese authorities would execute smugglers, but the profit was worth it. American families wanted in because American ships were faster than British ones. Clipper ships were perfect for evading Chinese naval patrols and delivering opium to secret coastal locations. American captains would sail to British India, load up thousands of pounds of opium, sail to the Chinese coast, and wait offshore at designated anchorages. Chinese smugglers would row out in small boats, take the opium, pay in silver. The American ships never actually entered Chinese ports, plausible deniability. The silver flowed back to America, tons of it. This went on for decades, from the 1800s through the 1840s before the Opium Wars, and continued after. Millions of Chinese became addicted, China's economy was destroyed, silver drained out of China into British and American coffers. In America, the families who got rich from it used that money to build legitimate empires. The Delano family, Roosevelt's opium fortune. Warren Delano II was born in Massachusetts in 1809. At 19, he went to China to work for a trading company. At 24, he became a partner in Russell and Company, the largest American opium trading company in China. Russell and Company wasn't just involved in the opium trade, they dominated the American involvement. They had offices in Canton, clipper ships, connections to British Indian opium growers, and they made millions. Warren Delano ran the operation from 1833 to 1846, 13 years of opium smuggling. When he returned to America, he was incredibly wealthy. Wealthy enough to build a 40-room mansion in Newburgh, New York, wealthy enough to send his children to the best schools. His daughter, Sarah Delano, married James Roosevelt. Their son was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR grew up in wealth. Private tutors, Harvard, political connections, all funded by opium money. The irony, in 1935, during FDR's presidency, he signed some of the first federal laws strictly controlling drugs. The man whose family fortune came from selling drugs to Chinese people made drugs a crime for Americans during his presidency. The other opium families. The Astor family. John Jacob Astor was once the richest man in America. His wealth built the Waldorf Hotel, funded libraries. Where did the money come from? The official story is fur trading, but the real money came from opium. Astor's ships sailed to China starting in 1800. He traded Turkish opium for Chinese silver, then used that silver to buy furs, tea, and silk. The opium trade was the profitable link that made everything work. By 1840, Astor was worth $20 million, about $500 million today, most of it from opium profits. The Forbes family. Yes, that Forbes. The Boston Forbes family sent ships to China in the early 1800s. Robert Forbes and John Forbes were major opium merchants, working with Russell and Company. Robert captained clipper ships carrying opium. John invested the profits in railroads and became one of Boston's wealthiest men. Their descendants used that fortune to start Forbes magazine. John Forbes is celebrated in Boston as a great merchant and philanthropist. There are statues of him, buildings named after him. Nobody mentions the opium. It's been erased from the official history. The Perkins family. Thomas Perkins was one of the richest men in New England in the 1800s, funding hospitals, asylums, schools. Where did his money come from? Opium. Perkins was a founding partner of Perkins and Company, which later merged with Russell and Company. He smuggled opium from Turkey and India into China for decades, made millions, then retired to Boston to become a respected philanthropist. The Perkins Scholarship at Yale, the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston, opium money. The Russell family. Samuel Russell founded Russell and Company in 1823, which became the dominant American opium trading company in China. Russell got rich, retired to Connecticut. In 1832, his cousin William Russell co-founded Skull and Bones at Yale. Skull and Bones, the secret society that produced presidents, Supreme Court justices, CIA directors. George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, John Kerry, all Skull and Bones members. The Russell family wealth that helped establish Yale's most powerful secret society came from opium. America's most powerful secret society was built on Chinese opium money. Scale and impact. This wasn't small scale. By the 1830s, American companies controlled about 10% of the opium flowing into China. British companies controlled most, but the Americans were significant players. Russell and Company alone shipped thousands of chests of opium annually, each chest about 140 pounds. The scale was industrial, the profits enormous. One successful opium voyage could bring 400 to 500% profit. The impact on China. By the 1830s, an estimated 10 to 12 million Chinese were addicted to opium, about 10% of the adult male population. The addiction was so widespread it destroyed China's economy. Silver that should have stayed in China drained out to pay for opium. The Chinese government tried to stop it, appointing Lin Zexu to end the trade. In 1839, Lin confiscated and destroyed 1,000 tons of British opium in Canton. Britain's response. War. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842. Britain won and forced China to sign the Treaty of Nanking. Pay reparations, open ports, cede Hong Kong. American companies benefited enormously because British companies couldn't operate during the war, so American companies took over their business. After the war, British and American opium smuggling resumed at even higher levels. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, Britain and France went to war again to force China to legalize opium. The human cost to China was catastrophic. Millions addicted, families destroyed, economy collapsed. But in Boston, New York, and Connecticut, American families were building mansions and founding universities. The most infuriating part, the hypocrisy. The same families who got rich from opium turned around and made drugs a crime for everyone else. In the early 1900s, America led the international movement to ban opium. The 1912 Hague Opium Convention, the 1914 Harrison Narcotics Act. America pushed for global drug prohibition. Why? Because by then, the American elite had already made their money. Chinese immigration to America meant opium dens opening in American cities. The elite didn't want competition, didn't want American workers getting addicted like Chinese workers, and certainly didn't want anyone pointing out that their own wealth came from the drug trade. So they criminalized it, painted opium users as criminals and degenerates, and buried the history of how their own families had marketed the same drug to China on a massive scale. Franklin Roosevelt, whose grandfather made millions from opium, signed some of the harshest drug laws in American history while president. The families who got rich from drugs spent the 20th century prosecuting and imprisoning drug users. The hypocrisy is suffocating. The whitewashing of history. The history has been whitewashed. Most Americans don't know the Delano, Astor, Forbes, Perkins, Russell, and Cabot families got rich from opium. Go to the FDR Presidential Library. The Delano family's opium connection is downplayed in a small exhibit as trade with China. Astor family histories barely mention opium. It's all about furs and real estate. Forbes family histories talk about railroads and magazines, not opium. The whitewashing is systematic and thorough. These families use their wealth and influence to rewrite history. Donated to universities with conditions that certain facts be omitted, controlled the historical narrative through foundations and endowments, ensured their descendants would grow up never knowing where the money came from. But the evidence is undeniable. There are shipping records, letters, account books, archives in China, Britain, and America. Researchers have documented it. Books have been published, but it's not taught in schools, not in museums. Average Americans don't know, and the families want to keep it that way. The modern parallel. In the 1980s and 1990s, the CIA was accused of allowing cocaine to flow into American inner cities to fund Nicaraguan Contras. The crack epidemic destroyed black communities. When the story broke, there was outrage, investigations, admissions. Now apply that same logic to the 1800s. American families deliberately dumped opium into China for profit. Millions of Chinese lives destroyed, China's economy crippled. These families used the profits to build American institutions that still exist today. Where's the outrage? Where's the reckoning? Where's the accountability? There isn't any. Because the families who did this became so wealthy and powerful they could rewrite history, ensure the crimes were forgotten, ensure their descendants would live in luxury and never face what their ancestors did. Conservative estimates. Between 1800 and 1860, American companies made $50 to $100 million from the China opium trade in 1800s currency. Adjusted for inflation, that's $1.5 to $3 billion today. That's just profit. The total value of the opium was much higher. This wasn't small-time smuggling. It was industrial-scale drug trafficking. Ships, warehouses, agents, bribes, complete logistics operations. The American companies involved employed thousands. It was large-scale organized crime enterprise. Except in America, it wasn't considered crime. It was business. The men who ran it were celebrated as successful merchants and captains of industry. What should we do about this? First, tell the truth. The Delano, Astor, Forbes, Perkins, Russell, Cabot, and Lowe families got rich selling opium to China. Millions of Chinese became addicted and died. China's economy was destroyed, and American families got rich enough to build dynasties. Second, acknowledge the hypocrisy. The same families who got rich from drugs then made drugs a crime for everyone else. They used their wealth to push for prohibition while hiding their own drug trafficking history. Third, question the institutions built with that money. Yale, Harvard, Columbia, museums, hospitals, foundations, at least partially funded by opium money. Should they acknowledge it? Should there be reparations? Should the families who still benefit be held accountable? These are uncomfortable questions, but they need to be asked because right now, these families are still powerful. The Delanos, Forbes, Russells, Cabots, they're still part of America's elite, still holding wealth and influence that came from Chinese opium money, and they've never had to answer for it. Franklin Roosevelt's family got rich selling drugs to China. Astor built an empire on opium. Forbes magazine exists because of opium profits. Skull and Bones was funded by opium money. Harvard, Yale, and Columbia have buildings paid for with opium profits. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's documented history. The evidence exists in archives, letters, shipping records, and account books. Researchers have proven it. Books have been published, but average Americans don't know because the story has been buried, whitewashed, erased from the official narrative. The families who benefited don't want you to know. Because if you knew the truth, you'd realize that some of the most powerful, most respected, most influential families in American history are descendants of drug dealers. The institutions they built, universities, foundations, political dynasties, were all funded by poisoning millions of Chinese people. The truth is ugly, but it's the truth. And it's time people knew. The opium families got away with it for 200 years, but the truth doesn't stay hidden forever.